morning, everybody. Welcome to the Statutory Planning Committee meeting of Wednesday, the 4th of March 2026. Welcome to those attending in person and online. The meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be available via the Commission's website and YouTube. Committee members may refer to technical devices throughout the meeting to assist them in their deliberations. And I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders past and present. Apologies today from Member Moore, and Commissioner Dare is joining on online. Disclosures of interest. I don't have any recorded for today's meeting, but members just checking that there are no late disclosures of interest. Thank you all. And any disclosures of representation on the items before us today. Thank you very much. And can all members please indicate that they've received and considered the agenda ahead of today's meeting? Thank you. There has been additional information for members provided, so that is noted in the agenda. And now moving to confirmation of previous minutes. We do have two sets of minutes, the 4th of February and the 18th of February. Members, are there any matters to raise in relation to either sets of the minutes? If there are not, we can move them together. No issues to raise. Thank you very much. Could I have a mover and seconder to adopt the minutes? Thank you. Moved by Member Harmon and seconded by Commissioner Lakey. Any dissent? No, thank you. They are both carried. Deputations and presentations. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. We have one deputation on the agenda this morning, which is on item 3.1 on the agenda, which is the precinct structure plan for the Woolstores Mount Elphinstone 2026 for determination, and we're welcoming Greg Rowe, Clint Doak and Mark Dyson if you'd like to join us at the table, gentlemen. We will shortly display your PowerPoint presentation on the screen and ask that you advise us as you wish to advance the slides about your deputation this morning. You have been allocated 3 minutes for your deputation, and a time will also appear on the screen which will count down that allocated time. So we'll just wait for that to load and invite you to commence when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee, for receiving us today. Chair, I'm aware, as best we understand, we are the only deputation in front of the committee today. And as a result of our strategic approach to today's meeting, I'm the only speaker. On that basis, I'd ask if the committee would be prepared to grant me some additional time to speak. I have a short version and I have an appropriate version of my presentation.
How long is your appropriate version?
Another 2 or 3 minutes would be more than adequate, Chair.
I'd be comfortable with that if the committee is supportive. Yep. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee. Chair, briefly introducing our deputation. We have today with us the owner of the land, Mr. Mark Dyson, the owner of the Woolstores, and we have Mr. Clint Doak, who is Principal Coastal Engineer for MP Rogers. My colleagues will be available for any questions, but as I said, no intention to provide any information at this juncture. Item 3.1 on your agenda deals with the structure plan, and I'm taking it as read that you've received my submission of the 26th of February. Thank you, Chair. So I don't propose to go through that in detail, and happy for you to have reviewed that, but also happy to answer any questions that might arise from that letter. The structure plan was lodged concurrently with a scheme amendment in August 2023 with the local government. Prior to that, however, we had spent several months working with the local government and to a lesser degree with the department officers. In January of this year, the scheme amendment was adopted, approved by the Minister and gazetted. This structure plan has been waiting for this deputation and presentation to committee for some time, but was held in abeyance pending the scheme amendment being finalised. The PSP is now before you, and it, in our view, is a favourable recommendation. It's supportive of the structure plan. It does, however, ask for 55 modifications. That's not unusual, and I'm sure there have been plenty of structure plans in front of your committee with modifications requested. We're only speaking today to 2 modifications, committee. The first one is modification requested number 39. This proposes a uniform 20-metre wide foreshore reserve to be created to the seaward side of the site for the full length of the site and to be given up free of cost to the Crown. The second modification is modification number 49 that we'd like to speak to, and that requires the char map that was prepared and submitted by our consultants to be amended before the finalisation of the structure plan to incorporate provisions that identify funding and funders of not only the construction of any seawall or mitigation measures, but also ongoing maintenance. If I could deal with that modification first, modification 49, as I described it, we say this is either unnecessary or unreasonable in terms of a condition. It cannot possibly be incumbent on a landowner proponent, and the structure plan require that landowner proponent to negotiate with and reach agreement with other landowners nearby or further afield, and various but not as yet determined government agencies to confirm funding, not only for construction, but also ongoing maintenance. Those provisions are beyond the capacity of any applicant to satisfy, and therefore we would take the view as unreasonable. There are no agencies that have been identified so far, nor any funds been identified for these tasks. During the course of the PSP, ironically perhaps, it was actually confirmed by various state government agencies, including the Rail Agency and Main Roads Western Australia, that they would not be contributing to any of these flood mitigation matters. In any event, we say that that modification as currently proposed is superfluous. Elsewhere in the PSP document, there is a requirement that the landowner construct all and any necessary flood mitigation measures and to continue maintenance of those measures. It seems somewhat of a contradiction to have a provision that is at odds with that. In any event, that is the current case. The current landowner, the current land parcel and the current seawall was constructed by the owner at the time and continues to be maintained by the current owner. We've made it clear in our submissions that that is to be the case. Our client has no problem, the current landowner, with carrying out any additional works required to the seawall and ongoing maintenance. For these reasons, we ask that modification 49 be deleted. More importantly, however, we'd like to turn our attention to the current wording of modification number 39, which proposes to require a uniform 20-metre foreshore reserve along the entire Princess Royal Harbour frontage of the site, and that land, 20 metres in width, plus any mitigation measures, be given up free of cost. For the following reasons, we say that's inappropriate. The current coastal modelling does not indicate that a 20-metre inland movement of inundation is in any way inadequate beyond the current seawall and the current setbacks and the current reserve that's already in place. If I could ask for the slides to come up, they'll help my presentation. The first one, please. The reason I've presented that slide, Chair and Committee, is to show the site, of course, in its context, but to show how the Princess Royal Harbour actually interacts with our site. That large plain area is at no time, we understand, more than 1 metre to 1.5 metres deep, and often during the year is drier. On that basis, I'm able to make the observation that the existing seawall, which has been there for something like 50 years, has provided adequate protection, and we've seen no evidence to suggest that in the long-term planning period that's applicable, that will change. If I could ask for the second slide, please. The reason I show that slide, Chair, is to show that there is already a substantial reserve in front of the site, but that is the rezoning plan that was signed by the Minister and gazetted less than a month ago. And that shows no foreshore reserve in addition to the existing reserve. We say it's inappropriate to deal with the scheme amendment in one way and a subsequent structure plan in a different way. I'll come back to that. If I could trouble you for that slide to stay on the screen, please. Thank you. The process of progressing the structure plan has demonstrated that the 20 metres that's being asked in the structure plan is arbitrary. It has no scientific basis that's been presented to us. There's been no data that we've seen that supports the additional 20 metres. We say it's simply an opportunistic approach to this matter. The owner's vision for this area is that it be high quality and well maintained and integrated with the foreshore. And that's the development that's proposed under the structure plan. We hope that the development will be consistent with the aspirations that are in the structure plan. But for the foreshore to pass arbitrarily into public ownership, we'll say we'll mitigate against that outcome. We say that a better outcome can be achieved by keeping this land in private ownership. This will facilitate a better, more intense and detailed development of the foreshore, and there will be a better management regime. If we examine SPP 2.6, which it appears the structure plan report relies on for this ask of 20 metres, and look at the principal reasons as to why a wide public reserve might be required, the principal objectives of SPP 2.6 are to achieve protection from coastal hazard risks and the protection of ecological, environmental and cultural assets. None of these apply in this case. Up until a few months ago, this site was fully developed as an industrial building right to its edge. We've already committed that the proponent will carry out the coastal protection. Our concern is that if the reserve goes into public ownership, it will remain unactivated and not integrated with the intended adjoining development. As best we understand, there is no proposal of any nature that includes this land to become part of any linkages, pedestrian, cyclist or otherwise, for the foreshore. There is no funding identified. There is no master plan identified that we've been able to establish. Chair, I'd like to conclude by asking the committee to consider the following. The need for the additional 20 metres reserve beyond the existing reserve has not been demonstrated as being necessary on any empirical grounds that we're aware of. There is no scientific basis that we've been provided with. There is no foreshore development, either imminent or planned, that sees this site as a part of any connected link for the purposes I discussed. The principles and objectives of SPP 2.6 do not lead to the conclusion that a 20 metre reserve, or in fact any additional reserve, is required to meet the objectives of SPP 2.6. And finally, the proposition to require that the 20 metres or any other reserve width be given up free of cost to the Crown fails the nexus test, fails it dismally. The action of applying for and adopting a PSP of itself and by itself does not generate the need to give up land, but certainly does not generate the need to give it up free of cost. There is no causal relationship, we say, between the requirement to give up the land and the requirement to give it up free of cost. It simply doesn't arise in this instance. Therefore, Chair and Committee, we would ask that proposed modification 39 be altered to read in accordance with the words that are in the conclusion of our letter of the 26th of February, which is an alteration to the suggested wording of modification 39. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. We're happy to attempt to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Greg. Can I ask the first question, if that's okay? Just trying to understand, your proposal is that the area that we'll just refer to it as the foreshore area would be 10 metres of foreshore and 10 metres of private ownership with easement. So therefore, I'm just trying to understand, it's not affecting the development yield. I'm just wondering why you favour the private ownership with the easement, given that it would still be possible to activate the foreshore area.
Chair, thank you for your question, but I, with respect, need to correct your first sentence. In our earlier submissions, we did propose a 10 metre reserve and a 10 metre setback. At that stage, we were not anticipating two things. We were not anticipating that we would get no credit for that land that might be given up in the POS calculation. We've since been informed, and it is in the PSP report, that we will get no credit for that reserve if we relinquish the first 10 metres. Secondly, we did not expect that any of the land, even if we relinquished it, would be given up free of cost. That was not contemplated. So, Chair, now correctly, our proposition is that we retain all of the 20 metres for the reasons I've explained. But the principal reason is that we do not believe that under Crown ownership, that area, the 20 metres, will be given the regard, the respect or the ongoing standard that we see commensurate with this development. We make judgments, acknowledging we're making judgments about agencies, but there is no agency committed to taking this land on board other than perhaps the local government. We say this will need special and particular and additional assets and appetite. Those criteria are within our client's capacity and commitment. We want the foreshore to be under private ownership so it can have the outcome that we believe is appropriate. And at the risk of labouring the answer, we don't see that happening through public ownership.
Okay, the other, just seeking clarification, you've said that you're wanting to take responsibility for coastal protection. I'm just wanting to understand, are you seeking to keep and maintain the current seawall? And if that is the case, given that it is of some age, have you had any engineering assessment to review that current seawall?
Chair, with your consent, I'll defer to our coastal engineer.
Yeah, so I think the approach that we've outlined is that for the first portions of the development of the seawall that's there is adequate. There will be some point in the future where an upgrade will be required, and that's what we've committed through the CHAR map to work through what that looks like. There's some plans that have been developed with the local government that show a hybrid style approach where it's not an obtrusive seawall, if you like, but a more natural sort of structure to provide a better aesthetic for the region.
Thank you. Members? Commissioner Heron?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and the clarification, particularly about the 10 metre component, which I was unclear on. So should the 10 or 20 metres be given POS credit? Does that change your proposition?
Chair, may I pause with my answer? I may be able to get some instruction, otherwise we may have to take it on board. Excuse me. Someone proposing this equal 6,000 square metres comes off your POS. Apologies, Chair, for that digression. The answer would be that the first 10 metres could be revisited to go into Crown ownership if we were given an equivalent concession on the other POS required in the project, and if we were in a position where we could continue the rights to maintain both the 10 metres reserve and the 10 metre setback. That's a critical part of our proposition.
Thank you.
Members? Yes, Commissioner Brooks.
Clint, have you looked at what triggers it would be required for reconstruction of the seawall? Has that been determined?
So in the CHAR map, it outlined that basically there's a portion of development that can occur based on the position with respect to the coastal hazard line. So anything that's compliant with the policy in terms of being behind the appropriate coastal hazard line, once development is in front of that, then there would be an upgraded seawall that would be required as part of that.
Okay, so we're using those but those lines haven't been assessed based on the seawall. They've been assessed on the basis of the same as the rest of the coastline.
Correct, yeah. So these lines have been developed as part of the City of Albany's broader CHAR map process, which in its first instance did not consider the presence of the seawall itself. So it identified as an unprotected site, essentially.
Go ahead, Commissioner Lakey.
Greg, just a question, and forgive me, you did talk about it just now. Just like a bit more clarification on condition 49. If you just take us through that requirement as well. And you're proposing or suggesting that be deleted, and primarily because of the requirement to anticipate the funding, the future funding. Is that? Am I correct in saying that? Is that?
Through you, Chair. Modification 49, as we understand it, and the way we read the report in front of you, has two problems with it, perhaps three. One, it's inconsistent with other provisions in the PSP, which require the proponent to do all the work at its cost anyway. That's the first conflict we see with 49 and the rest of the PSP. Secondly, if 49 stays, the proposition is that before the structures plan is finalised, the owner, the applicant, must put in place provisions and determine who is paying and for what. We are assuming that the proposition that means landowners, because we know the city is working on a contributory basis Charmat proposition, other landowners that might be affected, with an expectation they'll contribute, and other government agencies. We say that's either ranging from unfair and unreasonable through to beyond power, in that to ask an applicant to negotiate with all of those agencies prior to his planning document being finalised has no prospect of success, but certainly not in a timely manner. But the clues are already out there that we know that the agencies, even though some of the foreshore protection is to protect the rail and the new major road roundabout system, have shown no appetite, in fact rejected the proposition. And we presume given the same answer to the city as they've given to us. So we see no prospect of 49 being satisfied in any event. And we will come back to you, show you that, and ask it for it to be deleted as a modification after we spend perhaps an unreasonable amount of time demonstrating that. So we say it's either superfluous or contradictory or not capable of fulfilment. All of those mitigate to a deletion of it. If it stays, it's not fatal. You'll adopt the PSP and we will use best endeavours. We preempt that we'll be unsuccessful and we'll come back and ask for it to be modified anyway.
Just a follow if I may. So I mean, you're not saying that the char map that you've currently that's okay. The char map that you've got in place is consistent with other char maps, and that this you're implying this is an unusual step forward in terms of allocation in the funding. Is that it or not?
If this is unusual, we acknowledge that it's unusual in that for something more approaching half a century more, the landowner and the current landowner have undertaken all of the mitigation measures necessary and been successful. But more importantly, perhaps from your consideration committee, is that the current landowner, the proponent, intends to continue doing that, is content to have that as an obligation in the PSP, and therefore it'll be a portable obligation if our client is not the proponent. The other perhaps unusual limb to that answer, if I could ask that you might go back to the first slide, is simply the circumstance of this site. There is no, we say, flood surge, flood risk, inundation risk that's not already catered for. But even if there was, you can see where the water gets deep and where the water is shallow. All of the energy of any flood surge is used up in that significant distance. How that coastal circumstance came about, we have no view on it, we don't know. But the reality of it is the water is so shallow that the work that our consultants have done suggests that there won't be any need for any more mitigation for a long, long time, if ever at all. But having said that, to close your answer, Mr. Blakey, our client accepts it. And we say that 49 is somewhat at odds with the notion of a landowner accepting responsibility in any event.
Okay, thank you.
Aaron?
Thank you, through the chair. Just further to that, Greg. So even under the scenario of the 10-metre foreshore component, so the sea wall would be contained within the reserve. So you're suggesting that the maintenance of that sea wall, should it be within that reserve, would still be held by the landowner?
Obligation to maintain, yes, not the ownership under your scenario.
So the ownership would transfer to the Crown under that scenario, but the obligation for maintenance of the seawall would remain with the landowner. But as subdivision, etc., occurs, that would transfer as part of a strata obligation? I'm just trying to understand the
Mechanics.
Yeah.
Chair, if I may, the PSP already contemplates part of the answer to Commissioner, your question. It talks about currently, and I'm answering this in the context of your hypothetical proposition, Commissioner, that there might be some concession given on the open space. Irrespective, the PSP talks about all of the area that we're disputing passing over on the very first subdivision or development application. I haven't today taken up the time of the committee to argue the appropriateness of that. If we were to do development, for example, hypothetically in a remote part of the site, clearly unaffected, we might say we don't need to do that at that time. That's not part of our presentation today. It might be for another time, but not today. So the notion of how and when is already contemplated in the PSP. The trigger for the foreshore reserve, if it was under your scenario to be imposed, is on the very first application of any development nature, subdivision or built form.
Noted, thank you. If I may further to that through the chair, just and noting the historical nature, but also acknowledging that the nature of development going forward is going to be substantially different, therefore obligations change, and also that CharMap is fundamentally aligned or trying to deal with the issue of sea level rise. The note, is it being suggested that the current level of protection is appropriate for the future use, or is it just you're suggesting that that is appropriate until such time as a certain trigger comes along?
My view is that it's the latter, but I'll ask our consultant to respond.
So at present, it is sufficient to, it's proven, I guess, in the fact that it's actually holding that coastline there. It's sufficient to keep it. There will come a point in time where with sea level rise, if it occurs as is programmed and required to be contemplated by SPP 2.6, that there would be a requirement to update and upgrade. But the provisions that we've made in the CharMap development include a requirement for filling and development to be located above a level of 2.5 metres AHD, which will avoid any of that inundation risk. So that will occur regardless of whether the actual seawall is upgraded.
Thank you.
I just wanted to go to SPP 2.6 and just to say that the SPP 2.6 does require foreshore reserves to be handed to public ownership. It seems that what you're putting to us is falling outside of that policy. I'm not sure if where this expectation has come from that it would not go to public ownership, given that it's stipulated in the coastal planning policy. So I'm just trying to understand, particularly given it doesn't impact dwelling yield, why there is not an acceptance that that would go into public ownership.
Chair, thank you. Today is not the appropriate time or place for me to attempt to unwind SPP 2.6.
I agree.
But SPP 2.6, we say they have some false premises in its establishment, but nonetheless it is a statement of planning policy. However, it does inside of it say that those foreshore reserves should be set aside and provided for certain specified and determined purposes inside of that policy. One of them is coastal protection. We see no real reason why that coastal protection under SPP 2.6, other than it states it, needs to be in public ownership. The policy doesn't explain, other than one paragraph that says, and these reserves should be in public ownership. I'm sure somewhere there might be a document, paper or consideration that purports to justify why that should be in public ownership, but SPP 2.6 of itself doesn't provide any explanation. But if I leave that aside to attempt to answer your question, the purposes of the reserve, which is quite clear inside of SPP 2.6, is to either protect development adjacent or prospective from coastal processes, sea level rise, inundation. I hope we've demonstrated today, but certainly our reports demonstrate this site is not at risk of that. And if it is at risk of that, measures will be taken by the proponent. So that SPP 2.6 fails on that first point. The other points that go to why reserves are required are to protect, and I quoted it in my presentation, ecological, environmental and cultural assets. Those are evident here. This is a modified industrial site. There is no, that's been brought to our attention in any event, ecological values on the land that aren't protected in other ways. So, Chair, you're right. We were not told or given an expectation this question would not arise. We expected it to arise. We didn't expect it to arise in the way it has. The city asked for a 30-metre give up, by the way, again, with no explanation, no justification other than it might have I'm at risk of being a little cavalier about it. I apologise to the committee. There was no justification to that 30 metres. The department has equally not provided any justification, but reduced it, which can only demonstrate to us it is arbitrary. So with all of that in mind, the real reason, and the last part of your question, Chair, was why do we want it in private ownership? And it's about the aspirations that we have for this area. This is intended in the city's planning strategy, in all of the documents we've read and incorporated in our report from the state government, to be a world-class destination for tourism and residential outcomes. We aspire to that. The landowner aspires to that. And if this, as the report suggests, is to be an area for public toilets, barbecues and seats, that's not quite what our client has in mind. So we would like to develop this area to meet the aspirations of those other documents, including the PSP itself.
All right, look, I mean, it also goes to public access and recreation and other tenets of, West Australian lifestyle. So I think that those are things that we can flesh out as we come to the item.
You haven't asked me a question on that, but so it's clear, and apologies for interrupting, we have no problem with that public access. We will incorporate that in any legal mechanism that's fair and reasonable, and the ones that we've contemplated are fair and reasonable.
Thank you.
No problem with the public accessing that entire 20-metre area.
Thank you. Members, any further questions of the deputies today? Thank you very much for your deputy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee.
That concludes our deputations today, and we have not received any written deputation, so we can now move on to deal with the non-confidential items for discussion or decision today. The first being the item that we've just received the deputation on, item 3.1, the precinct structure plan, Wool Stores determination, and we are being joined by Mark Jendrzak and Kelsey Lewis via Zoom. Good morning, Mark and Kelsey. Thank you very much for joining us today. You've heard the deputation. We have had an extended deputation today and had quite a lot of discussion questions. Would you like to provide any comments? There's a few things there that we would probably need to seek your further guidance on.
Thanks, Chair. As you say, there's a few things in there. I'm just trying to work out where might be the best place to start. Maybe at the dimensions and the proposed width of the foreshore. I think what we'd probably like to clarify is that, as Commissioner Heron picked up, the proposal that was submitted was based on a 10 plus 10 metre foreshore area. Partially as public and partially via easement. So I guess that was the starting point for us in terms of the dimensions. We did note there were submissions received by the local government recommending other reserve widths, anywhere between 30 and 50 metres. Looking at this quite, I guess, pragmatically, after taking into consideration all the policy considerations and the recommendations of local government in submissions, we didn't see, well, I guess we felt that recommending a difference in dimension than 20 was probably would have been at a level of arbitrariness to it. The more fundamental consideration for officers was the tenure, what was the appropriate tenure of that area, and also taking into consideration I guess the acknowledgement that a seawall structure, a protection structure, would take up some linear meterage of that that area as well. So being mindful of having a dimension that was reasonable to accommodate a seawall structure and a reasonable foreshore area that was usable beyond that. And one thing that was a factor in reaching this recommendation is we went back to the City of Albany officers and we had a discussion with them about what they saw the area being, like how they saw that foreshore area being developed. And that's where we got the feedback at that stage that they'd see it as a fairly low key but landscaped area, and for them a minimum of 20 metres was required to ensure that they could access that area for maintenance and upkeep. Again, always pointing to their understanding of the eventual tenure arrangement, which would be that it was public reserve and that it would be under their care and control through a management order. Are there any further questions on the recommendation on the dimensions before we?
Or perhaps, Mark, it's sort of a bit separate to that, but there has been request for consideration of any public foreshore reserve to be considered against the POS contribution. Now, you have outlined in the report that SPP 2.6 would not ordinarily do that, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity to speak to that point.
Thanks, Chair. My understanding is it's as a policy position, it's open to the committee and the commission to make that determination if it sees fit. In that it's it's open to discretion. I think for us the primary issue remains that there is an adequate foreshore width provided and that it is in the appropriate tenure. So I think on the face of it, at officer level, I don't think there would be any fundamental concerns with that as long as those objectives were achieved.
Any further questions? Commissioner Adair, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to understand from your perspective, because this whole thing about the foreshore comes down to one critical issue for me, and is it so? My understanding that this is correct, I'd like your interpretation. Is the foreshore reserve required to accommodate coastal protection infrastructure and long-term coastal management?
Yes. So the envisaged outcome is that the protection structure is located within an appropriate reserve. Foreshore reserve is the usual reserve that you'd see.
As per the way the policy is written.
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Herron.
Thank you. In terms of the item around the requirement to determine funding for maintenance and construction, can you perhaps speak to that component? As I understand it, there is an agreement that the works would be undertaken by the proponents, but then in terms of the ongoing maintenance as well. Could you perhaps speak to that one?
Yeah, thanks for the question through the chair. It's a good pickup. In that modification 39 does state that the seawall protection structure should be constructed at the time of subdivision by the applicant or the owner. Modification 49 is, I guess, also acknowledging some of the things that were raised by Mr. Doak, in that there's like a time factor consideration to all this. So the any upgrades to the seawall that's there now might not be required immediately, but policy is very clear in that if protection structures are going in, and that scenario is that in the future something might need to be done to augment or to introduce a new element, then that ought to be covered off sort of as early as possible and understood and clearly set out, so that it is able to be used to guide and inform development decision making. And I guess the other intention behind modification 49 also speaks to some of the comments from the deputation, in that we understand that agencies who have land and assets nearby are not in a position at this stage to contribute funding or to be involved in a protection structure at the wool stores. But in the medium to longer term, if their assets are coming under threat from sea level rise, that situation may change. So the modification is more there to enable scope for that to be undertaken by the proponent and explored, and maybe have those mechanisms put in as a longer term arrangement, not so much an immediate term arrangement.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lakey.
Thank you, through the chair. I've got questions on each of those modifications. If I can just go to the trial map 49, the proponent indicated that although they disagree with conditions, that they could live with it, but they'll be coming back to us because it's not feasible in terms of dealing with all the different landowners and going around in circles and coming back to the commission because it's not something that satisfies that. Provide your thoughts on that.
Thanks for the question. Through the chair, we've in the modification there's 4 dot points. The first and second probably align to my answer to the previous question around the likely arrangements in the longer term that may be of benefit to others, as opposed to arrangements to build a seawall in the immediate term, which is just triggered by development under the PSP. The third dot point really, to me, speaks about the scenario being that if the proponent constructs the seawall and it's in a foreshore reserve at subdivision, for example, if there is a need to augment that seawall in 40 or 50 years' time, are there any obligations on the proponent post their installation of the initial seawall that they would need to respond to or be involved with at that time? Or would it be something that's taken on by the coastal manager, likely the City of Albany, at their risk, I suppose, of a potential future cost? And those are the things that we normally see set out in detail in CHARMAT implementation plans. And the coastal policy guidelines sort of, they go into that detail about covering off on those things in the first instance, so that it's clear for everybody what the longer term arrangements are going to be. The fourth dot point, I think, is less about ongoing management, and it's probably more about the practicalities of how you may go about constructing a protection structure. The coastal salt marsh is on the, I think it would be the southern corner of the site. So the rock wall does wrap around there a little bit anyway to me, it's probably about just having some detail in that implementation plan that sets out how, if any augmentation to that part of the seawall is occurring, or they're building a new protection structure there, just how that salt marshes, any impacts on that are avoided in a practical sense.
If I may, Chair. So, thank you for that answer. On 49 still, so the proponent has suggested a deletion of this update, requirement to update the plan map. If that occurred, what would in reality, what would be the impact on the development?
Through the chair, I think in one sense, I don't think it would. I don't think it would prevent the foreshore reserve being established, or the coastal protection structure being established in the first instance. I think the effect of it would be probably a level of uncertainty for involved stakeholders moving forward from that point about the longer term ongoing management arrangements and obligations, particularly for the local government, in the event that the foreshore is ceded as a Crown Reserve and management is handed over to them. I think there's probably some details and extra information that they could benefit from greatly via that modification being kept in.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Karen?
Sorry, apologies. I'm just wanting to also be clear in my mind in terms of, because I understand the notion, and particularly with the seawall component in terms of the public ownership. And as you've just spoken to around obviously having to take ultimate responsibility for that. In terms of the community access, of course, because under the original proposal of a 10-metre reserve, 10-metre being privately held but with access arrangements, I'm just wanting to understand where the determination was that was, I suppose, less appropriate. I think I understand, but I would like you to clarify that. And secondly, I suppose interrelated to that was this notion of the city having care and control. And obviously they're looking at a fairly low key thing, whereas I think that the proponents are clearly looking at a much more activated urban setting. So what would be the case for the initial proposal of 10-metre versus, say, the 20 metres, and then the proponents actually having rights of access or management for that interfacing area? I'm just trying to think of what is the practical outcome here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Through the chair. So the part of considering the proposal did involve going back to the city and having a discussion with them about how it might look for them and what the practicalities of that management arrangement for them in the longer term. And they were, it was less desirable from the city's perspective to be involved with an easement type management arrangement where there was essentially almost a seamless or no distinction between where the easement stopped and where the foreshore reserve began. Again, practicalities of management, particularly, and maintenance. Could you please just refresh me on the second part of your question, Commissioner?
Well, I just, in relation to whether if you had a 20-metre Crown Reserve, whether then the proponents could actually have care and maintenance of a section so that they could maintain it to their desired standard versus obviously the reverse. So the city, from what you're saying, the city have some concerns about it being under private ownership with access arrangements. I'm just wanting to understand, I'm assuming there are examples whereby you have a Crown Reserve which the adjoining owners get care and control over.
Thank you. Yes, that was also discussed, and the city were quite comfortable with the idea of, I suppose, lease or license arrangements where al fresco type products could be undertaken in the reserve area. I mean, I think it's quite common, a different reserve, but it's you see that down the main street of Albany, so that the city's quite accustomed to providing that sort of thing. Probably the other thing I would mention is that part of the discussion around what would the foreshore look like, we did have that discussion with the officers from Row Group who were dealing with the application at that time, and we did pose the question: was the idea that it would be a highly urbanised type or highly built out type foreshore reserve? And at that time, it didn't appear that there were any really strong, I guess, aspirations either way, and potentially maybe that's changed now, having heard the deputation today. But I don't think that the proposal or the recommended modifications to it prevent that conversation and discussion from being held between the proponent and the eventual land manager there to reach an agreed development outcome in the foreshore.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. Anything further? Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move to consider the item. So we have the officer recommendation before us. Can I please request a mover and seconder? Moved by Commissioner Brooks and by Commissioner Heron. Do you wish to speak to the item, Commissioner Brooks?
Just to say, I mean, development of this site would be a good thing in the long run. The SGP 2.6 is clear that there and has an objective which specifically states provision of public coastal foreshore reserves, and access to them. That is an objective which the proposal before us currently and the recommendation before us accounts for. So it allows for public foreshore reserve. The requirement under the requested modification 9 or a benefit distribution analysis is a required component of a TOR map and in accordance with the SP 6 guidelines, and is a normal requirement to establish who is going to construct, who is going to maintain, and who is going to manage in the long term for the benefit of the community. Whilst I accept that that may well be covered off by the proponent saying that they will take on that responsibility, there is nothing to stop them from updating the TOR map to specify that as a component of that modification. So I'm comfortable with the recommendation as it stands. That's why I'm supporting.
Thank you, Commissioner Brooks. Commissioner Heron?
Yes, thank you. I have given careful consideration to a number of components. I am actually comfortable with the recommendation in terms of the 20 metres, that it would provide the opportunity for both management of the protection component and providing clear responsibility around its ongoing requirements. However, though there is debate either way in terms of the other 10 metres, I think that having that in public ownership, because the second part is around access, I think that that is a management arrangement that can be worked through. And I think that the principle of community access to foreshore areas is a pretty fundamental component that sort of sits within the West Australian planning system. If we look at one of the, I think the benefits that we've had in WA is that many of our foreshore areas are under public ownership and control. I am more sympathetic in relation to the components which talked about trying to get agreements around the development and maintenance. I think that is a secondary issue, because again, trying to actually achieve that is highly problematic, and there is already a obligation around the development of the seawall components, as I understand it. I'd be open to modifications there, but again, I don't think that there's anything in the recommendation as it stands at the moment which is fundamental, and that there is the opportunity for any refinements to be dealt with as appropriate. I'm supportive of the recommendation.
Okay, are there any further comments in relation to the recommendation? Commissioner Lakey.
Chair, and I'd like to understand, and maybe I don't know, because Commissioner Herron mentioned previously about the POS credit, and can I ask Commissioner Herron his views on that, because of what you raised previously as in that discussion point, and I appreciate your thoughts on that again. I think for the 10 metre side of the 10 or the 20 metre.
Well,
talk through that.
Certainly. And again, if we need to add additional commentary, as I understand it, that there is the ability for it to be given POS credit. We have the discretion of that. I would suggest as a minimum that the additional 10 metres would definitely get POS credit, because it actually has a recreational function. The first 10 metres, based on the plan that I can see here with the full cross section, that also contains like the structures and the like, which are about the protection. So does it have a recreational value? That I think could be open for debate. But I would suggest that the land area in itself should be given a level of POS credit, but we do not have the level of detail at this point to be able to determine the extent of that. That would ultimately, I think, be determined as part of the subdivision and development processes which are to come.
So is this through you, Chair, is this the appropriate time to sort of, we felt that was appropriate. 20 metre reserve is a large reserve, and I think the proponent is not questioning the 20 metres. It's about ownership, it's about maintenance, it's the front door of their project. They able to maintain it in a way that it's an appropriate level, and if they have an ability to do that, if we were mindful to do that credit, is the appropriate time to that in as an alternative, in addition to the motion.
Something that we can consider. Sam has just asked Kate to what a modification really would look like, if that is something that the Commission wants to consider and debate. So, you happy to wording there about if we were to give 10% of the foreshore reserve as credit against POS in the overall PSP?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just conversing with the team in Albany to produce those words for you.
Okay, so we can consider that, but if we can fill some time with further debate.
Can I just ask one more question? Sorry,
Yes, of
and I
course.
defer to Commissioner Brooks regarding condition 49. And you were, I respect your opinion, you were very confident and clear in your comments earlier that in actual fact that the additional requirements for the charm under SPP 2.6 is actually standard requirements, which is different to what the proponent indicated.
So the current guidelines, current SPP 6 guidelines, they were updated in 2020. They do require a benefit distribution analysis to be undertaken. And what that's about is understanding who benefits from the work that's proposed, and therefore how that funding should be distributed between those different beneficiaries. It doesn't necessarily require every single one of those beneficiaries to agree to a sum of money or an ongoing funding relationship or arrangement. It doesn't require that level of commitment, but what it does is it establishes who are those beneficiaries and how funding could be determined when it comes to that point, comes to construction management maintenance. What it does is that for those coastal managers, the local government in this case, presumably, it establishes for them an understanding of who and how they can deal with to get funding in place to do necessary management maintenance works. So regardless of who builds it now, at some point in the future, it will require maintenance, it will require some level of renewal, and that comes at a significant cost usually. And it's important that there is an understanding in place as to how that might happen and how that relationship will be formed of the parties. At the moment, if it's just an isolated seawater on property, that's one thing. But there are other properties adjacent that may well require some level of protection, the rail reserve, etc. And it's important that it's understood for this site, but also has the broader context as part of that consideration.
So if I may, sorry. To satisfy the condition, I mean, and I've gone through those bullet points, it's specific to identify landowners and organisations, but it's not necessarily to get agreement from those landowners and organisations to a detailed plan. It's to identify them and to be able to satisfy. I'm just concerned that it's not a satisfiable condition, and we'll be going around in a circle. But from what you're saying, it's not to the level of engagement to actually get agreement signed and get landowners. Okay, thank you.
Taking the assessment and identifying
Thank you.
the mechanisms.
Right. Thank you, Chair.
Might just go to the officers to see if there is anything that they wish to add on that point. Is there anything further there that you wanted to add in relation to that process?
Thanks, Chair. We're just working up some potential wording in relation to the POS credit matter. The comments from Commissioner Lakey were regarding modification 49 again.
Yes,
correct? Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. Well, I think we've endeavoured to work as pragmatically as we can on this project with the proponent and also with the City of Albany. I'd suggest that we would continue to do that when it comes to achieving the intent of the modifications. So acknowledge that, yeah, potentially there might be some instances where detail that would be ideal just simply is not available, and that is through no fault of the proponent, or they've done as much as they can to provide that. So I think in finalising the structure plan in that context, I think we try and work as pragmatically as we could with that, and not work in a way that had it sort of stall anything at the last hurdle, so to speak.
Mark, would that include taking on a role in coordinating some of that feedback and discussion?
Well, I think it would be quite usual for the department to be involved in that sort of thing, where you have modifications that are a little bit open-ended or subject to further discussions with outside parties. We tend to be directly involved in those to reach those conclusions and those, I guess, outcomes that are intended. Yeah, so it's quite normal.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, commissioners, any further questions? Sorry, debate. Any further comments? Mark, I'm sorry, Commissioner Adair, go ahead.
Your time a little bit. Thank you, Chair. I too support the recommendation with the list of modifications as they're presented. I don't believe that we need to be looking to negotiate on POS width changes. And I believe that what is presented to us is actually in a form that provides some certainty for all parties. And I understand the argument about funding, etc. Not unusual to have developers or anyone else pre-fund things, any kind of public infrastructure. However, I think in the long term, and even with the timing of this, we do have to have some certainty around the timing of when things will be delivered prior to the development of the site and at what stage. And at the moment, what is presented to us, I believe, provides that certainty to all parties. Therefore, I'm supporting it as recommended.
Very much, Commissioner Adair. But we have had a sort of foreshadowed amendment to consider. I'm just going to check in with the team to see whether you have had any wording available.
Just received it.
Thank you, Chair. I've forwarded those to Sam for consideration.
Very much.
Have to use my thumbs.
Thank you for making it extremely large.
Yeah. That's essentially modification number 30.
Sorry, modification to 49.
Modification number 30 already deals with less.
I'm just seeking clarification on, is this a modification to modification number 30?
Chair, it's an update to existing modification number 48. Design elements, section 7.4.4.2.
Deals with the same thing. Either both. I mean, it's going both.
Mark and Kelsey, can you just review modification 30 as well, please?
Thanks, Chair. We've just reviewed that. Modification 30 essentially just says move that table to part 1. But for clarity and completeness, yeah, we could also update modification 30 to refer to as updated by modification 48 or similar.
Modification 30 to be updated in accordance with the modification. 48 might do the job.
Through the chair, would the structure plan have to be amended accordingly?
Well, the modifications are to
Infer,
yeah.
just checking.
Okay, so you could then delete the rest of that, Sam. Or just you can, yeah, probably just after. I think so, yes. Right, so that is a potential foreshadowed amendment. It does require someone to move and second, and then we can discuss if that is the desire of the committee.
Yep.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Lakey. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Commissioner Heron. Would you like to discuss, Commissioner Lakey?
Thank you. I think we've had a fair bit of discussion, so not much more to add. I think this is a balanced outcome. We're not discussing the extent of the 20 metres, it's more about the structure of it. And I think this is, like I said, I think it's a balanced outcome, which will deliver to really what the proponent's looking for and what also the department's looking for. So I'm happy to.
You've moved. Oh, so you're not.
I've moved it. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, in line with my statements previously, I was happy to have some consideration around this as a point of principle, although I think in public ownership is a key component. I think that the acknowledgement of the open space value that is provided and having that acknowledged formally makes it clear for all parties.
Any further discussion? I don't really have a strong view on this one. I can see that it is dealing with the POS overall, and when you consider what's captured in the current structure plan, it does just have the 10% in the foreshore. So globally, it's really resulting in the same open space, but SPP 2.6 does recognise that the Commission can require foreshore reserve in addition to POS. So a grey area for me on this one, and be interested to see if anyone has any very firm views other than the movement seconder.
Yeah, I'd like to speak against it. I believe the foreshore reserve is for land. And that foreshore has been lost because of rising sea level. Space needs to be dealt with. I don't.
Any further comments? All right, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? It's carried. Go back to the substantive motion. Is there anyone who wishes to speak that hasn't already? Look, I just wanted to comment. I do think it's really important for public foreshores remain in the public, and public access is a fundamental principle of SPP 2.6, and it is upheld across Western Australia. It's not a new thing or should be a surprise that is you know, quite an important principle in planning in Western Australia. So I'm happy to see that that modification I'm hoping will be upheld by the committee. In relation to modification 49, I think this actually works in favour in large way for the applicant, because it's really saying that there's uncertainty around the contributions towards further upgrade and maintenance of the seawall, and it's very important that is clarified at this point. Currently we have agencies like Main Roads WA saying that they don't see themselves having a role in terms of upgrading or maintaining the seawall. They see that is serving its purpose, it is for now. So I think it's really important that process is undertaken, because it's not just about the current context, it's actually about sea rise up to 0.9 metres, and that will change, and it does need to look at the existing draft char map over that over the coastal area there. So I think that is an important process for the applicant to work through, and I appreciate that the department officers are saying that they are prepared to lean in and assist in that process. So that is something I think that is important to uphold. Is there any further comments? Is there any dissent? Thank you. The motion is carried. Okay, we will move on to item 3.2, the MRS amendment for the South East and South West Districts, Omnibus number 5. And we are joined by Anthony Mascara and Oscar Thomas. Welcome to the meeting. Thank you very much for your report. I'm not sure whether there will be questions for you. I'm not sure that you wish to add to the report. But if there are any particular amendments there that you think need to be called out, please go ahead. Otherwise, we can go straight to questions. Thank you very much. Members, over to you for any questions. No, okay, all right. If I could then have a mover and seconder for the recommendation before us. Moved by Member Franklin, seconded by Member Knight. Any discussion?
In regards to, quarterly and proper planning of a program, virus amendment, support omnibus amendment, next step.
Thank you very much. Member Knight, nothing to add? I think that omnibus amendments do serve an important function, and it's really good to see them come through, because I know a lot of these amendments do lie in waiting for a long time before there's a kind of almost like a sort of collective level before you can take it forward. So it is a really good opportunity to really tidy things up. A lot of work done in one efficient process. So I want to say thank you to the officer. You are actually covering quite a significant area of the metropolitan Perth here. So thank you. Any further comments? All right. Any dissent? Thank you. That is carried. We do have one confidential item to consider, so I will ask for a move and seconder that we close the public to consider the confidential item. Moved by Commissioner Frank. I was going to say Commissioner Franklin then, Commissioner Lakey, and seconded by Member Harmon. Any dissent?